Let me ask you this. Have you ever read the Unabomber's Manifesto?
I live it. No, I haven't.
I wouldn't recommend living it, but I'm not afraid to admit I ordered it off of Amazon. Probably
you're
on a list now.
bro. You're definitely on a list.
Yeah, and his theory.
By the way, can I just say it as a site? God bless America that you can buy that book.
Yeah, I think it's such a weird thing. When you get the book, it's got this whole disclaimer on the back that's like, no funds go to the Unabomber. Like, all the funds are donated to the Red Cross and to the publisher just to cover the costs, right?
But it's cool that we can preserve that and not just burn it and be like, this was an evil. Like,
Now,
let's hear what this guy has. What's going on?
Let's
blow up some schools, right, Michael?
No, let's not.
Okay.
The uncomfortable thing about the Unabomber is that he had a lot of the same philosophies that futurists do today, except that he mailed bombs to people, right?
Yeah, where's that disconnect happen?
Yeah, I think, the disconnect was that he believed the only solution was a revolution that completely tore down society.
Okay.
He goes so far as to say we need to destroy and burn technical manuals, books. This is all based on, this is an idea we hear all the time, that like we evolved for millions of years to deal with a certain kind of society and life. And then rapidly, in the last just hundreds of years or less, we've had to go into a whole different kind of living that our biological bodies and minds weren't evolved
I guess
for.
that's what Jordan Peterson meant.
And what the Unabomber says, which I'm glad to be quoting now.
Let's put him on,
He's like, look, if you... He asks this good question, which is, if you had to spend every day fighting for your survival, finding food, hunting, building structures, reproducing, and you had to do this in all of these creative, challenging ways every day, and that was it, just to not die, would you still want to check Twitter? Would you still want to study the motions of the moon?
Yeah.
Like, are those really giving humans happiness? Or is it a thing that we've invented to fill the time that we now have because we've invented agriculture?
Right.
And we don't have to worry about food and survival.
Yeah.
Instead, we can study the physics of ceramic. We can do all these other things. And those aren't I forget what he calls them, but they're not these true goals.
So his opinion is that arts and science is bad?
Yeah. I mean, he's a
Luddite. Isn't that just? I mean, I'm like arguing with the Unabomber now. You're like defending him, but that just seems stupid because I mean, you can just go living on a fucking farm if you want to.
And that's what he did.
Right.
I mean, he still, I think, had to buy certain things that he could not get for himself. I think he didn't make a lot of his own clothing, but his whole argument was that look at the car. Okay, the car was invented, and it's more than an invention, though. It is something that we now have to deal with because think of how many people live in a place where they need a car just to get to work or to see family.
Yeah.
Again, that's what it's like. You have to buy car insurance. You need home insurance. All this shit that you have to deal with.
Right. So technology isn't
So
just
let's
a
blow,
bonus.
yeah.
A technology is a thing that changes
shackle.
us. And all of a sudden, now we've got cars, we have roads. You're not free to go wherever you want to go, actually. It used to be you could just walk wherever.
Right.
Now, the highways, it's actually, you can't walk there. No pedestrians, right? And a lot of this is at least philosophically interesting. I don't prescribe to his philosophy, but I think that it's worth considering these. There's a great Wired article called "The Future Doesn't Need Us." And in that article, the author quotes the Unabomber without crediting him. And you read this section, you go, that's really amazing. That like we're reaching a point where we can't turn off the technology because our lives depend on it. And then later in the article, he's like, by the way, that was the Unabomber. And you're like, whoa! And that's what actually spurred me to get the book because I wanted to see this. And it is fascinating to think what I've evolved to be able to do to spread my genes all happened before the internet, before telephones, before agriculture, before tools. And now this technology is here and it's, it's affecting us.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I've always felt that like evolution isn't really taking form in humans. It's more the technology is our evolution. Like we're fighting natural evolution because if someone's born with a birth defect, we help them survive. Someone who's like we coddle or.
I see what you're saying.
People are being eliminated from the gene pool, like what would happen in the wild, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Natural selection is now
has stopped.
Controlled by us.
Yeah.
And I think there's incredibly great arguments for why it's important. Hey, you have trouble getting around? This can help you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
There's this much more abstract question of, because we invented the container, it's all downhill from
the container is where it all started.
Like because we could start collecting more berries than we needed for that day, we all of a sudden lost this cycle that we have to go through psychologically of finding a challenge and overcoming it.
Right.
All of a sudden it's like, well, I don't need to do any of this stuff to live.
Yeah.
But I've got the time, so I'm going to go and do a 9-to-5 job, or I'm going to, learn how to juggle, or I'm going to, and those all are great. But the perspective that do they make us happy is really deep.
I genuinely think that part of the reason why people are so depressed or anxious or whatever is the lack of like fundamentally and biologically fulfilling things, like growing shit or raising a child or have like these things, building a shelter, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That like our brains are wired to actually be satisfied when you do something like that. And we don't have that level of satisfaction by going to a 9-to-5 job and getting a check and picking up groceries. Like you don't get that same sense of purpose from these things.
Fulfillment, I think, is that key word.
Yeah.
You said that, and it's weird to imagine that question that I posed earlier, which is that if every day was about, will I be able to find enough food and clean water to survive? But I'm able to do that, but it takes up all of my time and cognitive resources and creativity every day. Would I still do X? Would I still, And it's weird because are you arguing that we shouldn't have explored the world or invented the printing press or poetry?
Right.
The Unabomber would say, yeah, that's bad. And I hate the cliche of there's a balance that we need. But I think that it's something we're going to be asking ourselves more and more and confronting.
It's inevitable. It's like you can't fight progress. It's like,
or can you? The Unabomber believed he
it's
could.
I feel
did
like
not work out.
What he thinks is he's going back to a natural state, but I would argue it's unnatural to fight the progress that we're having.
Yeah, this is.
I think what we're undergoing is natural.
Because our brains evolved to be able to realize, hey, I can make this stone a bit sharper and do things with it.
Everything happening is natural.
Yeah.
We're all playing out like the natural course of how a species like ours evolved. And my point about natural selection no longer taking place is that we're no longer being selected on a biological, like I think in 1,000 years, if we're still around, we're going to be the same species. But the technology is now what's replaced biological evolution is a technological evolution.
Yeah, might it be that in the future, thousands, tens of thousands of years from now, natural selection will have selected people who don't get so stressed out and depressed by technology's influence on the world. Because if you don't fit into the mold of like, well, what's your job? Like you gotta have a career. You gotta do this thing.
But you can't. But they'll still reproduce. Probably. Maybe over the course of many, many times that because it's still a matter of reproduction, right?
Yeah, totally. So everything that happens after you can reproduce is in this selection shadow. Natural selection doesn't really get molded by what happens to you later. So heart disease, Alzheimer's, those things all happen so late that it didn't get weeded out by natural selection.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that'd be a great movie.
I like so.
What is it like in 30,000 years? Is everyone just like the kind of mind that thrives in a corporate environment because that's what's expected. I mean, there's this really narrow expectation, and if you deviate from that, you're weird and dangerous, and you can still reproduce, but then you've got suicide, you've got factors that could influence that.
Right.
And
Sure.
it sounds like a sci-fi movie,
Yeah.
but it's a possible future. And so, again, if you want to learn more about it, I would recommend other futurists besides the Unabomber. But
It all starts there. All good.
it didn't
all good.
start
Yeah.
there, but he, got that manifesto published in the New York Times.
But wow.
Yeah, that was one of his demands.
interesting.
So this is called. I find that a little bit paradoxical. This philosophy is called futurism, of this thought that we should.
That's just a broad
Okay.
term for thinking about
forward.
the
Right.
long future.
Got it.
Yeah. Being terrified of technology and its influence, that's being a Luddite. That's a different thing. You could totally love technology and think that it is going to bring the best future possible.